Welcome everyone. My name is Arun Sudhaman. I'm Editor-in-Chief at Provoke Media. I'm really happy to be joining you all today on this webinar in partnership with Sandpiper Communications. It's great to see so many of you here today for what promises to be a fascinating session, I think, to recap key reputation trends from this year and more importantly, set the stage for next year. We're going to look at the drivers and detractors that are shaping public perceptions of an organization in an increasingly complex business and political environment across Asia Pacific. I think we're all aware that we're living through a period of accelerating change and that there are increasing reputational challenges that organizations and individuals must navigate. To do that, we're very lucky because Sandpiper Communications will be presenting findings from a survey on reputation drivers and detractors across 12 markets in Asia Pacific. You'll get the first look at that research, and I think you'll find it very interesting and very helpful as you all plan your strategies for the next 12 months. That will be followed by a panel discussion. I'll introduce the panelists shortly, where we will discuss the findings and the key themes, and then we will open to the floor for a Q&A. If you have any questions, and I'm really encouraging all of you to post questions, please don't be shy. You can use the Q&A box on Zoom. I think we're all familiar with how this works by now. Please feel free to post your questions throughout the session. Don't wait until the Q&A bit, please, because you know, the more we get, the better, and we will we'll go through them, and I'll make sure that the right questions are being addressed to the right person. So that's the structure. Let me introduce the people that are joining us on today's session. So presenting the research on behalf of Sandpiper Communications is their Chief Operating Officer, Kelly Johnston. Joining me afterwards in the panel discussion, we have Asma Sukandar, who's the Head of Communications and Society at Diageo. We also have Stephen Forshaw, who's Head of Public Affairs at Temasek. And we have Edward Brewster, who is Director at Sandpiper Communications. And you can see them all there. And you'll see them all in actual virtual real-life glory soon. Right, let's get started, I think, with the research findings. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to Kelly Johnston. Kelly, over to you.
Thank you, Arun, and hello everyone. It's great to be here with you today. So why did we decide to take on research in this area? Well, it's our view that we should be thinking about research, about reputation in the same way we think about capital. With reputation management becoming increasingly complex, knowing where to start has become a bigger challenge for companies. In addition, in this digital age where reputation fortunes can change quickly, there's a continual need to reassess investments in reputation capital to promote and protect your business. So what we have here on this slide is just a bit of a snapshot of the research that we conducted. So 11 markets, 6,000 participants, 500 to 700 respondents per market. With the research being very, very fresh, just conducted in September to October 2021. I'd also like to mention that we actually included some questions in this research from a prior study that we did, which we packaged as the Consumer Expectations Index that was released in 2019 prior to COVID. So with multiple changeable and conflicting forces at play, a helpful way we believe to think about reputation capital, the theme of our report, is as a reputation capital economy. And we explore some of the themes in this report. So I thought I would start with this. So whereby the currencies of information and communication are exchanged via channels and sources of engagement and influence to accrue, well, ideally accrue wealth and reputation capital over time. So what are some of the key findings that we observed from our research? We've packaged our findings into 10 key trends, which I will very briefly run you through right now. There is a lot of data that we have from this study, so please bear in mind when I'm running through this. This is very much a snapshot of what we have found, and we've presented it in this way to hopefully bring out some of the key themes. So looking firstly at reputation drivers and detractors, we see 3 key trends. Firstly, the importance of having a holistic approach to reputation management. What we found is that while some reputation drivers are naturally stronger than others, all of the drivers we studied are actually either very important or important to 80% of all respondents across the Asia Pacific region. This demonstrates that while certainly we do need to keep focus in this area, at the same time, we also need to be taking a holistic approach to reputation strategy to avoid missing any important insights or opening up to unnecessary risk. The next finding is around cybersecurity. So one of the most surprising findings from our study, we found that cybersecurity has actually become just important to consumers as good quality products and services and customer experiences. In fact, on average, cybersecurity was actually the single most important driver for reputation across the region. And all markets had ranked cybersecurity as the top 3 driver. The third finding in this section is around employer brand, which may not seem surprising to some of you. So among the major findings in this area, we have statistics such as half of people in the region would not wish to work for a company that doesn't have a good employee experience. Around 2/3 would be unwilling to work for a company that they don't see as having good attention in the ESG and sustainability space. Why is this significant? Obviously, amid the great resignation and other forms of talent crunches at the moment, not investing in this area, we see from the data can seriously diminish a talent pool for a company fairly quickly. So now turning to navigating expectations, what do consumers expect from organisations? So there is good news, firstly, for communicators, in that we see very clearly that the classic rules of crisis management that we all advise on daily apply everywhere. In general, the principles of crisis management hold true, even with regional variations. And namely, the most important factor is obviously to limit reputation damage, and to do this, transparency came out as the #1 factor that would do this during a crisis or issue. This was followed closely by speed of response and also having an empathetic approach to what your customers may have experienced. The next finding shows quite a shift actually from the Consumer Expectations Index research that we conducted in 2019, as I mentioned earlier. So while it likely reflects the importance governments have assumed in managing the global pandemic in the past 2 years, the end result is that our expectations of governments across the region have never been higher. This means, of course, that this is driving increased pressure on governments to act to solve societal challenges, such as those that we're seeing in the ESG space at the moment. The third finding in this area is scientific citizenship gets scientific. This reinforces that it's not enough for organisations to be good corporate citizens anymore. You need to have very much, the research is clear, you need to have a credible ESG position, credible metrics, be disclosing those metrics. And we do see that across the region, quite interestingly, these factors and showing things like environmental impact and social impact is actually more important to audiences in developing markets than mature markets, with quite some difference. Then looking at our key findings in the final area of building influence, we have 4 trends here. So the first, navigating fragmentation. So amid increasing fragmentation, we do see very significant variations between different audience demographics and markets in terms of how they are to be engaged with. And I think this comes back to, the insight here is that companies must really be equipped with multiple channels of communication, including strong social channels to be able to engage with all of their audiences and stakeholders. Another change from 2019, we see a rise of experts. Again, we think this is a byproduct of what's been happening during the pandemic. But when we compare this against the 2019 results, where we saw that family members were in fact the most trusted sources of influence for individuals, this has now shifted on average across the region towards experts. Next, we have share my values. So we see a very strong trend for consumers across the region to be more likely than ever to engage with brands that share their values, beliefs, and passions. Also more likely to share content from these companies, the content that reinforces their own values and the beliefs that they have. However, very interestingly, while consumers are happy to be engaged by companies, most in fact say that the content they currently receive from companies online is not relevant to them. Finally, we have open young minds. So generally younger audiences across the board are open to influence, to being more influenced from all sources, as long as your narrative is based on actual real experiences. And we thought it was worth highlighting because as future customers and natural adopters of social media with very high connectivity beyond their own specific audiences, building relationships with younger audiences, whether they are your target audience today or not, may be a strategic imperative worth considering for every company. And finally, in the report, we discuss new approaches to measurement and evaluation in this environment. So with the increasing availability of data and technology to assist analysis in this area, our viewpoint is that reputation, the viewpoint, that reputation is intangible and its impacts on business outcomes cannot be measured, is certainly being increasingly challenged. While the broader marketing profession has been quick, I think we would all agree, to embrace new advances in data and analytics to quantify the bottom line value of investments in brand and marketing activities, communications teams, for many reasons, have been slower to do so. However, this study and one key takeout, we think, is that this reaffirms what we all know, that organizations' reputation plays a large and increasingly critical role in areas such as customer and stakeholder behavior and engagement and ease of doing business. Brand and reputation are not the same, and the latter deserves at least equal attention when it comes to measurement and evaluation. So these are just some of the findings and insights from our research. A full copy of the report will be available for download via our website for anyone who is interested after this session. And thank you very much for your time, and I hope you will find the insights available useful for your planning in 2022. And very much look forward to hearing the panel discussion.
Thank you, Kelly. That was really, very interesting. And I would recommend everyone goes and downloads the report, because I think there's quite a lot worth reading. Okay, let's start the panel discussion. If I could ask the meeting host to please bring up all of the other panelists onto the virtual stage, as it were. And I don't think we necessarily need to keep sharing the screen now. We can just go straight to videos of everyone. So I guess the first question I wanted to ask is really around the first trend that was identified, specifically the multi-dimensional approach that's required, where everything seems to be important to reputation. And I guess the issue with that is there's a risk of companies trying to spread themselves too thin as they try to address different reputational issues, many of which we just talked through on the PowerPoint. So Asma, I wonder if I could come to you first with that question. Is that something that you think is challenging for companies to address, and how would you handle that specifically?
It's really interesting. So first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to participate. It's always great to have these discussions with peers and colleagues and hear more about research. To be honest, I think the findings weren't necessarily a surprise. I think most of us who have done comms in APAC and anywhere really, those are kind of like the suite of types of elements that you would look at. I think maybe for me, what was interesting was which ones kind of surfaced as being a little bit more important to the findings than others. I think that, yeah, so I wasn't necessarily, I don't know if it would change the way that we would look at how we do our comms planning, because I think that these are elements we would take into account as needed. I think it reiterates, though, the whole idea or the concept of our ecosystem being a lot more complicated now than maybe it might have been 2 years ago, because everything is suddenly important all at the same time, when maybe before there's certain factors that could take a backseat.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Asma. I think it kind of speaks to just the complexity of the challenge, and we'll get into the specific issues perhaps as we continue this discussion. Stephen, over to you. I mean, from your perspective, is it realistic to be able to kind of treat all of these multiple dimensions as kind of being of equal, or at least of kind of valid importance, or is there a risk of companies perhaps spreading themselves too thin as they try to do that?
Yeah, thanks, Arun. Good to be with you. I think the question that companies have to ask themselves here is, like anything, what do you prioritize? I think there's some great findings in this research. The issue with any research when you get a list of more than about 3 things is that you're going to have to properly identify where to put your resources. You cannot be all things to all people at all times. And by prioritizing and picking the areas that are going to be most important, then I think you have an ability to focus your communications efforts. I do think that, calling out some of the areas like cybersecurity, these are not just reputational challenges, they are business and technology challenges. And so as a communications or reputation management professional, yes, we may have to clean up afterwards in some cases, but I would elevate the importance of preparation and mitigation on the part of the business to ensure that you can actually effectively go where the priorities are going to be, and others in the business can support the reputation by being better prepared and able to mitigate cyber threats, for example. So, as I say, the challenge for any reputation management professional is akin to an air traffic controller. You've got a big screen in front of you with a whole lot of dots going around in circles. As they get too close to each other, they can become problematic. If they get too close to you, they become problematic. And at the end of the day, we're the ones who have to keep an eye on all of those things and know where to guide things properly, both within and outside the business, to ensure that we have a good feel for what's likely to impact our reputation of all of the things going on out there.
The importance of prioritization. So Edward, from your perspective, is this something that you see clients struggling with, and how do you advise them accordingly from a kind of reputational perspective? Perhaps, even when there are so many kind of perceived threats out there, I suppose it's very easy to turn every molehill into a mountain.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, but we're right at that stage of the year. I mean, the event today and the research today, it's timed because people are doing their planning at the moment. They're thinking about next year. And we're, with clients, I worked in-house previously and in-house as Stephen said, there's so many issues, so many themes, and Asma talked about complexity, and that's absolutely right. And I think this is the period in the year where you get your chance to step back, sit back and sort of consider what are those key themes and issues. What do I need to be thinking about? What do I need to be developing around each area? And, you know, this is your moment to plan and set out, well, this is what I want to do next year. And I think what the research is telling us is we've all got the same challenge. You know, there's so many different themes and issues now. It's no longer just, you know, your product, your service, your management and your financial performance. There's so many more factors. It's just this multi-dimensional world is so much more complex. But develop the plan, track it, and then measure it through the year. That's what we're recommending.
Thanks. Sounds so simple, but I suspect it isn't. Asma, I wonder if I could come to you. I mean, you know, we've talked a lot about, you know, companies determining what matters to them. So I'm curious to know, you know, of the kind of factors that you saw that have been presented, which ones would you say are important to you, and or most important to you, and how did you come to that determination?
I think I would take a step back first, hearing what everyone's been talking about, and from the perspective that I come in with how we look at things at Diageo. I think the key thing, starting point for us, is usually we're very purpose driven. So we have a very clear idea of what our purpose is in terms of, you know, what grounds everything. People start to understand, and you start to know yourself as an organization, right? What's important to you? That's kind of our starting point when we look at all these factors with what we are wanting to achieve and what we stand for. What are the elements, looking at our ecosystem, that could put pressure on it, or risk that, or be opportunities. So I think that's kind of an area. Cybersecurity, actually, it's interestingly is something which I think we keep an eye on, and I'm definitely noticing more from my IT colleagues training us to kind of understand it better and what it means on a day-to-day basis. But I have to say that on general comms, it's not necessarily the key factor that we look at the moment, or that didn't jump out at me. So that was interesting to me as something that wasn't. Everything else kind of might, you know, ebb and flow. Employer brand is a very big one for us, for sure. I think looking at, you know, sort of rise of experts was interesting, because these are more like, I didn't really perceive them as, oh, this is more important to me than not, but really more of, I also want to ask, actually, you know, Edward, you're in Sandpiper, just in terms of who were the 6,000 people that were surveyed, just in terms of demographic, because that, as I read the results, it kind of made me wonder what sort of background they might be. Are they, you know, sort of what industries? Did you look at certain industries? Did you look at certain age and gender? Because then, it just sort of was a question that came up for me, actually.
So in terms of the research, demographic were representative of the population overall. So that we didn't specifically target, you know, informed professionals. It is a demographic in terms of male-female split, age split, that represents the population. So
like age split, are you saying like from 18 onwards as adults, or, you know, like working professionals, just to kind of have an understanding of the basis of it?
Yeah, so exactly, from 18 onwards, exactly. I mean, and that for me is why it's so striking, the prominence of some of the themes, or particularly cybersecurity, because I personally felt it would have been lower, but even in that quite broad demographic, you know, representative of the population and consumers as a whole, it still came out, you know, override, you know, as this top driver.
So I might be the contrarian here, but I was far from surprised that it came out on top. I think this is a trend that we've been seeing growing for some time. It relates entirely to trust. We are now giving over vast amounts of our data to organizations as consumers. We are becoming more and more concerned because we see more and more threats in the landscape around that data being perpetrated by cyber criminals, hackers, and some state-sponsored organisations as well. And the increasing prominence of cyber incidents, I think, does not give me any surprise that this is starting to really affect how consumers view organisations from a trust perspective. We entrust our data, in some cases highly personal data. We've seen instances of, healthcare providers, for example, being hacked. You can't get much more personal than healthcare and insurance type data, financial services, banking details and so on. And I think the important thing for businesses to understand is that the trust element is on them to get this right all of the time. It only takes one cyber incursion to create that breach of reputation. The defenders, the organisations like ours, have to be good at this 100% of the time to keep out that one incursion. And I think you talk to anyone in your IT teams, they will tell you that the number of attempted cyber incursions in most organisations is measured in the millions or billions per month. A lot of these are robotic. They are just bots seeking to find and exploit a loophole. But the worrying ones are the ones where they are very sophisticated, spear phishing type instances, going after proprietary data, going after personal data. And they have the capacity to undermine public trust. And so I'm the contrarian here. I do not see that as a surprise at all. I've seen this coming for quite some time. And, I come back to the point I was making earlier. It's not just a communication challenge. As I say, we can only clean up the mess after it's happened, but you need to be in a position where the business sees this research and the business understands at board level, at CEO level, that building resilience and strength around cyber, building capability to protect your digital assets is now probably the key ask of most organizations by the public.
Mm-hmm. When you put it that way, I see what you mean. I guess I was thinking through from the perspective of different types of organizations. Cyber, what kind of cyber data do you have coming from, sort of our organization sells drinks. And we do have a lot of, proprietary information that's more related to, sort of clients, et cetera, and data, but not to the level of, say, as you said, health, where we do know, like you said.
Yeah, but you have significant intellectual property data.
Totally.
Recipes, for example, of generations old beverages that are your key, and
totally. So they're not necessarily accessible, I think, to everyone.
I will tell you, a cyber incursion will find everything, and I think if you look. And this is the great understanding that communications professionals must have. If there's a cyber incursion, the way these things work is that you may have someone behind your firewalls for months or even years amassing data, reaching out from terminal to terminal, being able to exploit any vulnerability within your internal network. And so what you may find is that 3 people may hold, for example, the keys to your IT system. It may take a cyber incursion criminal, weeks or months to find those 3 people. And when they do, they have complete access to everything in your system. And I don't want to be a doomsday scenario person here, but these are the issues that organizations, all of our organizations, big or small, have to be prepared for.
Yeah,
your shareholders. You lose your intellectual property. Your shareholders come after you because why would I be a shareholder in the company, for example, when there's nothing left in terms of the intellectual property?
Yes, we've actually started getting questions through from the floor. So thank you all for that. Please keep them coming. From Pierre Boom here, he says, and this I think kind of echoes the discussion you've all been having now, that he says he assumes the cybersecurity driver is so important because of the direct connection to privacy and data protection. All right, let's talk about the rise of experts, because that's an interesting one, perhaps, because we've been told for many years that experts were kind of becoming increasingly worthless because everyone became an expert. And now perhaps a rebound, perhaps COVID inspired. Ed, let me start with you. What do you think is driving that particular trend?
There's a real indication in the research that people are deferring to experts far more because of the pandemic. So be it government experts, scientific experts, and ultimately analysts as well, there's a much greater degree of trust in those professional people. Now, obviously, the pandemic has all sorts of impacts, but look from our perspective at Sandpiper, looking at these findings, it reinforces to us that companies and our clients need to really drill down and remind themselves who their experts are, be they internal experts, so who are their guys in their company who can match, can be their spokespeople, or be it external commentators, who are the people who are going to be trusted in defining company A's reputation. And that's what the research was really telling us. The pandemic has amplified the role of people who consumers trust and trust for opinions. Actually, for the first time, well, since this previous set of research, they've overtaken family members as the most trusted source.
Asma, over to you. Just wonder how you see that particular trend. Do you think, are we out of the woods, perhaps, in terms of this kind of feeling that everyone can be trusted, regardless of their.
It's all about, again, like coming back to the issue of trust, right? We've been through periods of uncertainty, not 100% things are certain in just sort of with continuing dealings with the pandemic and how it impacts just, I think, how you think about your own ecosystem, your work, your life. I mean, I was just having a conversation on just sort of how it impacts your psyche daily, the uncertainties of just the pandemic, like rules changing around you, around how you can live and how you can interact with people. And I think there's a natural shift towards wanting some kind of certainty from someone. And I think this rise of experts is really, from what Edward was saying, is really about, people who seem to have a bit more of a grounding of information that has, it's sourced, there's some kind of scientific backing behind it, perhaps, they've kind of done their due diligence, because there's a lot of uncertainty, and because there's a lot of uncertain information out there. It's like your mum forwarding you things on WhatsApp that she doesn't know where they're coming from, and you trust your mother, but not sure about this, alternative medicine thing that she might be sending you that could be, a boost to your immune system and whatnot, right? So I think that's really, again, like coming back to the issue of trust, and then we're being in a period of uncertainty. Of course, there's lots of detractors to, what is an expert. And I think that's also really interesting for me to see. I think as comms people, to see the rise of fake news. Whose expert do you believe? Like from which side of the people who are for vaccinations and the anti-vaxxers, right? Everybody has their own experts.
Stephen, my concern is this is just a transient thing, and actually the forces arrayed on the side of disinformation and misinformation are just playing by a different set of rules compared to corporates and corporate communicators, and I feel like it's a losing battle in the long run. I don't know what your thoughts are.
In my most pessimistic moments, I guess I think like you do, Arun, but I am quietly,
I think like this all the time.
Yeah. I'm quietly confident that what we've seen in the past 2 years, despite all the noise, and this is where I agree with Asma, that there's been a real reason for people to require expertise in the past 2 years. And I think that's probably taught us something. Yes, there are detractors of facts who get a lot of noise and attention in the media, but seeing through that, I think what we're seeing is that people are actually being far more skeptical now of what they read on Facebook and what they read on social media in particular. it has meant that there's been a gravitation back to some of the more traditional forms of media, which, you know, now have to understand that they have trust issues themselves, because if they are in a position where they're actually broadcasting or printing material that's wrong, it really does undermine their own trust. So you see this with CNN when they have to make corrections, for example. It really does, it's a painful episode for them to do so. But all I can say when I see that there's a swing back to experts is thank goodness, about time. I think, though, it has been helped across our region by huge numbers of campaigns being run very directly by governments combating disinformation, telling people to avoid rumours and speculation, verify and check facts. Even with some of the social media platforms calling out fake news with very direct access to posts, calling them out. I think the social media platforms can be doing more to combat some disinformation, and particularly hate speech that leads or follows from that disinformation. But I think that the effort is now being made, constructively by a large number of parties to sort of have people a bit more skeptical, to check their facts. Even just before we came on this call, I was getting messages from people saying, oh, restrictions are being lifted in Singapore, news articles are being shared, and actually the news articles being shared are from exactly a year ago. So people are not even reading the date, but quite happy to forward those articles on WhatsApp and have everyone thinking that the rules have changed. So, I think it's also down to us, as consumers, and I'm not just talking about us as communications professionals, us as consumers. We've got to be a little more skeptical of everything we read on social media, and particularly the stuff that's forwarded to us on private chat groups on WhatsApp and Telegram and so on. And as communications professionals, we need to be able to put our experts into the field. I have no problem with experts debating each other on points of view, but I think there needs to be a clear understanding of what the facts are. You may be entitled to your opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts. As I think it was Senator Daniel Moynihan in the US who coined that phrase many years ago. It's more relevant today than perhaps it was even in his day.
So we've actually got quite a few questions coming in from the floor, which is really great to see. So I'm actually going to start posing some of them to all of you because I want to make sure that people asking questions do get their questions heard. So this one is actually on experts. It's from Arpana Kumar Ahuja. She's asking about the role and differentiation between experts versus micro-influencers. And I wondered if any of you, which of you, Ed, you've unmuted. Do you want to?
Well, I'm just going to say that one of the, in terms of the debate around sanity and the desire to have credible commentators, one of the disappointing things probably for social media influencers in the research is they come third bottom in terms of people who are influential, just above celebrities and politicians. So I think, we can, as Stephen was saying, we can get sometimes a bit carried away. I think in the main, people are more sensible. The research certainly indicates that people are more sensible and trust the right audiences and the right commentators. They're not trusting the influencers.
Yeah, so for me, expertise comes down to establishing it, and that doesn't mean just by showing that you have the requisite degree or the requisite university qualification. It's a track record, and so staking a claim of expertise now is a lot harder than just presenting a resume of your degree and so on. You actually have to show that you have a body of work behind you that can demonstrate that expertise. I think you'll find that media organisations are now being far more careful about who they call out as experts. It used to be a case, especially pre-pandemic, that it was almost dial a quote. Who can we ring who's kind of got the right degree or, is a professor of something or other from some university somewhere, that we can quickly dial up, because he or she will always take our calls, is great for, you know, putting on the screen, and can answer the questions with a great soundbite. Those times, you know, media organizations are coming unstuck when they use those type of experts. So I think there's a lot more diligence going into who is put up as an expert. And that falls on organizations like ours too. You know, we've all got bodies of experts on various things in-house to talk about various subjects, but we shouldn't overstate their claim. We should make sure that we are very credible in the eyes of our stakeholders, the public, when we put an expert up to talk about something. And frankly, if you don't have the expert, then don't claim the expert.
There's actually, I'll just stay with that, because as Arpan has asked a follow-up, isn't influence dependent on credibility? I would
Absolutely not.
Yeah, I'd
Absolutely
say based
not.
on the influences my daughter follows, no, absolutely
Yeah.
not. But does anyone else have maybe a more scientific response to that?
I was going to say, you know, to echo a little bit of what Stephen was saying, you know, it comes down to when you're thinking of experts versus micro-influencers. Yes, experts are also influential. But I think when you're talking about micro-influencers, in my head, that's sort of a different definition almost. That's sort of like a social media influencer is what I have in my mind. Doesn't mean that they can't be both an expert and an influencer, but the lines don't often very cross. You don't often get that necessarily. And I think when you're thinking experts in the definition of, you know, using this person as a you know, as a credible source on a particular topic, experience really, it's them having that experience and knowledge of a particular body of work or industry or whatnot, that then, you know, when they're talking about it, it's not just something they've prepped for to do in a short, you know, few lines or to kind of fill up 2 minutes of conversation, but that, you know, that you could get more out of it because they have such a wealth and breadth of experience and knowledge on the topic.
Yeah, you can be an influencer without being an expert.
Yeah.
And I think we have to, as people who put news into the field, we have to be well aware of when that's the case. So seeing some pop celebrities, for example, become advocates for vaccination, we have to understand that they are influencers. They will influence a huge number of people who follow them, but they are not experts. And I think we have to draw a very clear line and distinction between, you know, someone who spent a lifetime on vaccination science and so on versus someone who's sold a few million songs on Spotify or whatever.
All right, let's switch gears for a moment. We've got a question coming from Stephen Thomas, which I think is really important. Can the panel please comment on the impact of geopolitics on corporate reputation in Asia in 2022? Stephen references the Vitasoy situation in Hong Kong. I don't know if three of you are actually familiar with it, but Vitasoy's business was massively impacted for the negative in 2021. It found itself stuck in between a sort of Hong Kong protest situation and a Chinese consumer boycott. Should more companies be proactively game planning to be ready for when such issues strike them?
Well, I think the answer, the second part of that question, the answer is, should companies be planning? Absolutely.
Yep.
You should be planning. You should be thinking about where you sit, where the risks are, what mitigations you can put in place. That's exactly what, you know, all good companies are doing and have been doing. And I imagine both Asma and Stephen could probably talk at length about the planning and the work that they've been doing. I mean, one extra observation I'd make is it's not just about the companies, actually, it's about the media and the journalists. You know, some of them have been put in very difficult positions, you know, with the geopolitical situation. They're getting pressure from all sides as well. And, you know, as communicators, we've got to be sensitive to that we don't make their jobs any worse. I'm not going to thank you if you're going to make it more difficult for them. So good planning and understanding that, you know, the guys you're talking to, the guys or the girls you're talking to, are also under quite a lot of pressure in this area.
Yeah, I would just add, you know, my perspective on this perhaps a little different, because our company doesn't directly sell goods and services, you know, like Vitasoy does. But I think, you know, we're no less impacted by the potential for geographic and geopolitical threats. we're an investment firm. So, the success of businesses that we invest in depends very much on the political climate in which those businesses operate too. So I think, on top of, thinking about and planning for yourself or your own organization, you have to plan around your stakeholders, your vendors and suppliers, for example. If as a company you think about Apple and its relationship with some of its suppliers in China, so it may not be an issue specific to Apple. It may be an issue specific to one of the suppliers that they use. So the gaming, the sort of gaming of the scenarios that you're working on is now far more complex than just your own organization. I think, though, the other thing that's important is when making key decisions, and by key decisions I'm meaning many business decisions, you need to have a lens on the geopolitical environment and the potential for how those decisions will be interpreted by highly sensitive players in the geopolitical space, so that you don't end up in a position where the decision having been made then needs to be reversed because of consequences that weren't thought through. One of the great challenges for organizations is the great back down. Having made a decision and then immediately reversed course on it, it causes people to question whether the decision making was correct in the first place. And I think we've seen a number of cases of that in recent times, where perhaps organizations with the benefit of hindsight might have added a bit more of the political view to the dimensions that they need to consider. That's also making the function of people like us, and particularly people like us who've had experience in government and political affairs at an international level, very, very important to organizations. So if you're not involved in the decision-making process within the organization, but only brought in after the decisions are made, then I think it's time to reevaluate whether the organization's making the decisions the right way.
And I mean, one thing we're definitely seeing is huge demand for public affairs skills. Asma, is this, I mean, Diageo, not necessarily a company that you would associate with geopolitical risks and so on, but is this something that's becoming a bigger issue for you as well?
Well, I think, we're a multinational organization. It works across 180 different markets. It's naturally something that we think about and is part of planning at all levels, because it's sort of the environment in which you operate. So you have to keep an eye on things. And you, as Stephen says, it's part of, what's going on, what government decisions are being made in one part of the world that could have impact on another part of the world and you operate in both. So I think that these are things that are, the short answer is yes, you plan, and yes, you take into account all of it.
Yeah. And just, if I could just stay with you for a moment, because I know you mentioned before how important employer brand is to you. Do you see maybe changing expectations in terms of employees, in terms of how the company addresses some of those geopolitical issues?
Well, I think not necessarily those geopolitical issues in particular, but we definitely are seeing a different, and I think that it goes beyond just Diageo, but just, when you're looking at talent, and trying to attract talent. And especially I think in the past, 18 to 24 months since COVID, there's extra considerations beyond geopolitics that come to the fore related to things that maybe are, I'm segueing a little bit, but since you bring up employer brand, that go into the realm that perhaps a lot of organizations didn't consider to be part of our realm, like well-being and wellness, for example. These things, are definitely now right in the mix of part of what we would consider to be purview for the corporate now, which before, we didn't go near. You look at health, yes, you want to make sure everybody's healthy. If they're ill, you want to take care of them. But now I think with this, the kind of, I think work from home over an incredibly extended period of time has sort of made it so that you have to consider your staff and your people as a 360 person versus just the 180 that you see in the workplace, because they work in their personal space now, and how well they can manage and stay not just for you but for themselves has become important, and it's really, I think, shifted also people's priorities of the kind of organization they want to be a part of, because they've had that sort of exposure, and that's had a direct influence on how we start talking about ourselves as an employer brand, and how we've seen lots of other organizations also leaning into things like the types of benefits that you might offer and talk about, which maybe before you didn't talk about. And the kind of, just your culture has become a lot more important, I think, as part of the employer brand than perhaps it might have been before. You might wait to figure out the culture as long as it's a top brand or they're performing really well. But now I think those are amongst the top things that people look for in a new employer when they kind of start looking for jobs.
Yeah, I have to say, I couldn't agree more. And the research couldn't agree more either. And the extra thing the research adds in is the generational difference. So younger people expect more and expect better. I don't mean better in terms of pay. I mean better in terms of how businesses behave, how they treat their employees, and their ESG, obviously. I mean, you've got society in your title, Asma, and you just said it, but the research really bears this out. So companies who aren't understanding this are going to face bigger challenges and bigger problems in the future, and a much smaller sort of talent pool to choose from, because if they've had bad coverage on employment issues, young people just good young people just won't want to work there.
So we've got just over 5 minutes. We've actually got a question which I think will lead us quite nicely towards closing remarks. And it's from Catherine Chan. Do you see that organizations are increasingly adopting a leaner structure because of COVID? And I'm not sure if that's specifically referring to the comms function, but you can answer for both the overall company and for your corporate affairs and comms functions. Stephen.
Yeah, so actually, it's a difficult question to answer, because if I look at comms, public policy, ESG, the type of issues that we've been spending a lot of time on, I actually see these are tremendous growth areas for companies as they're seeking to acquire expertise in-house, as well as supplement that with partner vendors, agencies that are working with them that have dedicated and specialized skill sets. So actually, it might not be to the full extent that we see as where we'd like it to be in terms of the growth, but the growth is there, and I'm seeing this across huge numbers of companies that, particularly as they have to get sharper on things like ESG, they are looking for both talent and partner relationships to help them do that. There may be other areas of the business which are on which they're getting a little more lean, because they're able to use, for example, technology and data analytics. And so things like media planning and media buying, where you're increasingly now using AI-based tools to be able to target particular media and search algorithms and so on. Maybe it is becoming a leaner function. So what we're actually seeing is a bit of a transference of skill sets from one part of the traditional or once traditional public relations function to another part of the more comprehensive public affairs, corporate affairs type overview.
So I guess no, in short, right?
Yeah.
Definitely not seeing it. Asma, over to you.
It's an interesting question, because I think at one point, maybe not necessarily in our organization, but being part of sort of APAC-D and talking to lots of other peers across the region, it looked like there were some areas of say our function, the comms function, if they had really big teams. We don't have big teams at Diageo. It's already quite lean, I think, but who had big teams where there might have gone into sort of smaller teams for certain parts of the business, as Stephen was saying, like certain areas of expertise where if someone was doing it in-house and they had like 3 people, they might not do that anymore because they might outsource that. But we are seeing definitely, and this is something we're looking at too at Diageo, is yes, growing that area of expertise in sort of ESG society work. And that area, because it is I think that, to go back to what I was saying before in terms of reputation and as organizations beyond reputation, but just about, the type of successful organization that you might want to be, there's more around purpose, and ESG is incredibly embedded in part of that as the kind of overall picture of what a successful company is and what a sustainable company is. So I think that part of, the equation, they have all the people to do like the financials, because that's already, I think, sales and performance is embedded in an organization. But this other part around purpose and ESG is not necessarily as robust with everybody. Some companies are way ahead of the game in having developed that, but some are still sort of figuring it out. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity in that space still, and more so, even more so later on, because, when you then marry that with something like, looking at, you're looking at expertise around ESG for, say, investors, but then you're also looking at actual expertise in programming of what sort of programs you're doing. And then you're looking at expertise on the regulations that come around it, related to, the areas you're looking at. So that there's a lot of headcount there and a lot of types of expertise that you might want to invest in.
Indeed, yeah. And Ed, can communications functions in Asia really get any leaner?
Well, as they say, the only constant is change. I mean, working cultures are changing and the challenge is changing. It is leading to change in structures. But as both Asma and Stephen said, I don't think it's about leaner. It's just about working differently. They're going to be calling on different expertise, just in agreement, really. Not leaner, just changing how they work and how they support the business. Is changing because the challenge for them is changing all the time. So much more this idea of multi-dimensional, all the different channels, all that.
Sure, and that's a good note on which to ask for my final question. So, as a kind of closing remark from each of you, but please bear in mind we only have around 2 minutes left, so I want just no more than 30 seconds from each of you. Everything we've talked about in this session has really pointed to what I would describe as the rising value of communications and corporate affairs to an organization. And we've gone through in detail why it's so important to an organization's fortunes, because of the impact of reputation drivers and detractors. So for our attendees, what is your one piece of advice to ensure that the gains made in terms of the rising value of communications within organizations are not squandered? So who wants to take that one first? Stephen, can I come to you first?
Yeah, so let me say, I think it comes down to one word that is the golden word for all of us: authenticity. There's a lot of data here that drives how people are thinking about reputation. And the reality is, if you take bits of all of that, you'll find it very difficult to straddle a road that has your authenticity coming through. Having the right values as communicators and connecting with the executive leaders of the firm to make the right call and to be authentic to yourselves is what's paramount in driving your reputation, because reputation is not something you can decide. It's something that you earn. You earn in the eyes of the stakeholders through your behavior constantly over a period of time. And you have to do that and get it right all of the time to have the reputation that you aspire to have.
Yeah, okay. And I think that's shone through in the pandemic, the importance of authenticity. Asma?
Yeah, I echo what Stephen was saying. So authenticity, trust, understanding that you've got to have trust to build that trust, to have that reputation. That means also that you have to stand for something. So coming back to the idea of purpose, and having that as a kind of, guiding, the guardrails, so that when something's not quite right within your purpose, then you question it. That's already a problem. And as a guiding North Star to kind of inspire you and sort of galvanize you as well to protect that reputation.
Yeah, so the importance of standing for something. And Ed, you get the final comment?
Well, yes, purpose and authenticity, but we think that research is clear as well. Smart and thoughtful investment in your reputation capital will pay dividends. And that's the message you should be taking to your C-suite and your board. Let's invest more in this, guys.
All right, excellent. Well, thank you all so much. As always with these things, I feel like we could go on for another hour. We covered a lot of ground, I feel, in terms of reputation drivers and detractors, underpinned by some very interesting research, which I recommend you all take a look at. Big thank you to the panelists, Asma, Stephen, and Ed. Thank you to Kelly for presenting the research. Thank you to everyone that joined. We had a great turnout. Thank you to everyone that contributed questions. Sorry we couldn't get to all of them, but you can track us down. You can find us. We are not hard to locate. And yes, it's the end of the year, so I hope you all get some sort of a break over the festive season, and we're back in 2022 with the fruits of this kind of research to help us. Thank you.
And thanks for
Thank you, Aaron.
moderating a good conversation too.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Ed. Thanks.
Thanks,
Bye.
Aaron.
Bye.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Stephen. Bye.